In today's gospel, Jesus tells us that we don't need to fear anything that the future might bring. It's not that bad things won't happen. Jesus says they surely will. But what Jesus also says, that is, if we live like he taught us, if we engage in the practices that he showed us, we'll have the inner resources to deal with anything life throws our way. And in the culture in which Jesus lived, the opposite of fear was not courage, though courage is needed to attain it. The opposite of fear was joy. And so to live a fear-free life was to live a joy-filled life. That's why Jesus said that he came that we might have joy and that our joy might be complete. And so what we want to do in today's sermon is we want to look at how one of the ways that we can build a life of such profound joy that it will inoculate us against being afraid, being anxious, being alarmed. And to understand the way that we're going to talk about, we need to understand something called the fulfillment curve. Some of you have probably seen this before. We've actually talked about it before. And the fulfillment curve looks something like this. Normal bell curve, all right? Looks like this. And we have two axes. This one axis might be more. This axis might be joy. So to understand this curve, we might use an example. We might use, ice cream. All right? Anybody have a favorite flavor of ice cream? Chocolate's what they said at last service too. Okay, chocolate. We'll go with chocolate, but we'll say we flew it in specially from Ghirardelli's in California. Opened up the pack of dry ice, and that's what we got here. And so, in terms of the joy of eating ice cream, actually, which bite is probably going to be the very best? The very first one, right? I mean, in a sense, everything's going to be downhill from there. That very first bite is going to be the one that provides the most joy of all. So we take that first bite, and and our joy starts to go up. We take another bite. Okay, that affirms the pleasure of that first bite. We get a little more joy out of it. Third, fourth, fifth bite. But somewhere along the line, we're going to hit the peak of this curve, aren't we? And actually, it's going to occur far earlier than we might first think. It's going to occur pretty early on. You don't need a whole lot of bites before our body says, all right, that's enough. Had enough. But the problem is if we don't recognize what our body's saying, if we don't recognize our own internal signals, if we're driven by external pressures, if we're driven by old habits, if we're driven by compulsions, then we're going to blow right past this point, aren't we? We don't learn to recognize this point right here. We're going to blow right past it, and we're going to take another bite. But at this point, if we take another bite, what happens to our joy? It starts to go down, doesn't it? And we say, oh, gee, I think I need a little more ice cream. And so we take another bite, and then another bite, and pretty soon, what have we done? Eaten the whole doggone pint, right? I mean, now the pint's lying on its side, and it's empty. And how do I feel about myself? I feel like I'm gross and disgusting, and I probably hate myself, and I'm so empty inside. What do I think I need? Another pint, exactly. I'm glad somebody else thinks like I do. I'm glad somebody else thinks like I do. That's the fulfillment curve. Somewhere along the line, we hit the peak in the joy that eating ice cream offers. And if I don't know where that peak is, if I'm not mindful and conscious enough to recognize that, and I blow right past it, then actually my joy level is going to go down and down and down until I'm not feeling happy at all. And we can apply this to all kinds of things. We can apply this to wealth. You know this is true. A man who's been described as a wunderkind, the guy who is credited with helping find the whole field of moral philosophy, a guy who is an atheist, but because he's an atheist, he says he is absolutely dedicated to empirical research. So he's not particularly coming at this from a spiritual viewpoint at all, but he's going to rediscover the old spiritual wisdom, as we so often talk about. But he says this about wealth. He says, after decades of research, the weak relationship between wealth above a very modest level, okay? So very early on, wealth brings us to a certain level. The weak relationship between wealth at a very modest level and happiness is not a tentative finding. It's more like a law of human nature. And this law of human nature says that past a certain point, wealth simply does not buy happiness. Past a certain point, guaranteed, not just because Jesus said it, not just because you know this is true in your hearts, but because empirical science, after decades of painstaking research, says that beyond a certain point, more wealth isn't going to do you a lick of good. In fact, if you continue to pile up things, if you continue to accumulate, if we continue to shop and spend and buy, not only is it not going to do us, it won't do us any more good, it's actually going to start to work against us. And what's true of ice cream, what's true of wealth, is just as true of any one of a number of things in our life. It might be true of success. It might be true of pleasing people, of our need to be praised. It might be true of status symbols. It might be true of shopping. It might be true of a level of fitness, always pursuing a higher and higher level of body fat, or actually lower and lower, well, yeah, me higher and higher, but lower and lower level of body fat. When a certain level is very healthy, but you go much below that, it's not healthy at all. And so the point on this curve, that we really want to pay attention to is this point right here, because if we don't need to learn how to recognize this is so important. See, this really is one of the fundamental truths of a life well lived. I mean, this is really one of the fundamental principles of a successful life, is learning to recognize this point, because if we don't recognize this point, we'll just blow right past it and we'll send ourselves deeper into this curve. And what that'll do is that will only unleash ever greater unhappiness as it heightens our fears. We become afraid that we're going to be crushed by the people who are getting ahead of us, the people that we envy to begin with, and we're afraid they're just going to crush us as they get more and more and more. I think it's going to leave us less and less and less. We're afraid that we're going to be left out of the good life that we're told that's out there, when really the good life's in here. But never mind that. The good life that we think everybody else is enjoying, but everybody else is looking at us and thinking we have the good life, and so we have this, we think we're going to be left out. But everybody thinks they're going to be left out. And we feel like we're going to be consigned to this life of deficiency and lack. So this point right here, this is what we need to learn to recognize. And there's a name for this point. It's a very common word. It's a word we use all the time. But it's a word that is maddeningly hard to recognize, even when it's staring us right in the face. The truth of this word is just so elusive. And that word is the simple word say it with me. That word is enough. This is the point where we say, I have enough. I trust that God has given me everything I need, and I realize that I don't even want anything else, because anything else is just going to plunge me deeper into this curve. We live in a day and age where we're just told over and over again, more is better, even too much is not enough. So there are going to be all these forces that are going to drive you past this point. Don't listen to them. They're lying to you. They're deceiving you. They're selling you out. Don't listen to them. Recognize enough for what it is. Because when we recognize, when we come to this point, the point where our joy is complete, the point of maximum fulfillment, when we say enough is enough, two things happen. Two very, very important things. Two things happen. The first is that our fears begin to be transformed into joy and thanksgiving. Because what happens when we realize that we have enough is that we realize that I have everything I need, and so there's nothing extra in my life to weigh me down, to distract and distress me, to fuel further fears. And that creates a space where I can refocus not on all the things I think I still need, but on everything I have. And when I become grateful, I say, holy cow, I have so much, so much, so much. And now I become grateful. And it's gratitude that unleashes the floodgates of joy in our life. I mean, it's gratitude that's at the very heart of a joyful life. And the second thing that happens, and this too is just so important. But the second thing that happens is that when I can say enough is enough, I don't need anything else, I don't even want anything else because it'll just drive me deeper in that curve. When I can say that, then I am freed up from all the junk that occupies space in my life but that doesn't serve me or anyone else well at all. You see, The authors of the book, Your Money or Your Life, which we've talked about before, and which is where I first saw this, the fulfillment curve, they say it this way. They say, when we understand this, and I love this. I mean, listen to these words. These words are so profound. When we understand this, we understand that being suffocated under a mountain of clutter that must be stored, cleaned, moved, gotten rid of, and paid for is a fate worse than death. Everything beyond this point is just clutter. It's going to weigh us down, worry us, give us all kinds of reasons to be anxious and fearful. But what happens, and this is the amazing thing, this is what's really incredible, is that if at this point we can realize that enough is enough, so our fulfillment curve looks like this. Here's the peak of our fulfillment curve. If at this point we realize that there is nothing external, there is no external solution to our internal longings, if we realize that's the case, and now, instead of trying to get, we start to give. Now, instead of thinking just about ourselves, we start thinking about others. Now we start to develop our heart, mind, and soul of just trying to acquire more things. Now what happens to the fulfillment curve is it actually starts going back up again. Because that's what brings true happiness beyond a certain point, is giving our lives away for the sake of others, according to the true purpose in our life, and according to what really matters to us. And when we do this, that also inoculates us against fear. Because when we think about other people, when we give instead of just worrying about how much we can get, then we don't have the time, the inclination, or the energy to worry about ourselves. And let's face it, the worse the situation gets, the more opportunity there is to help other people. If we're in a terrible situation, we might have lost a lot ourselves, but there's always somebody who in some way is worse off than we are. And if we're focused on what we can do for them, that will always be a source of joy in our life, no matter what comes down the pike. That will inoculate us from being afraid because we're not thinking about ourselves in the first place. Well, this actually ends our sermon series on stewardship, all right? And we've really tried to do this a little differently this year. And I hope you've noticed. Whether we've succeeded or not, I don't know, but I hope we have. First, we've tried to say that stewardship isn't a season. It's not a season in the church year. It's a way of life. Not just 4 or 5 weeks where we talk about certain things. This is how we should live every day. Second, we've tried to say this really is not about time or money. This is about who we are. This is about who you are. This is about who I am. And what we've tried to say is that if we're the people that Jesus calls us to be, if we're the people that I believe in our heart of hearts that we want to be, money will never be a problem. It's just that the most honest way, if we're brave enough to admit it, the most honest way to get at who we really are is through our time and our money. A person a lot of people are paying attention to right now, very helpful guy, is a guy named Richard Rohr. And Richard Rohr writes this. Where does he write this? He writes this. He says, your checkbook and your calendar reveal your actual belief system. Religious faith does not become this real religious faith that does not become this real, expressed in our checkbook and our calendar, is largely an illusion. It really comes down to how we use our time and money. This reveals the gods before us. Maybe that's why Jesus talks so much about money. I mean, you may not realize this, but Jesus talked about money far more than we do. We often think we'd want Jesus around, we'd probably get tired of him. And Jesus talked about money a great deal, not because Jesus wanted it. Jesus never had a penny to his name. But Jesus knew that the biggest competitor for our hearts was always going to be wealth and money. And so he talks about it over and over and over again. So again, we're not really so interested in money. We are interested in your hearts. We are interested in who you are. That's where we want the focus to be, because we think if we get that right, the other piece will take care of itself. And then the final thing that we hope that this stewardship campaign has been about is not simply about funding some institution. I mean, really it's not. But our hope is that what this has been about is about promoting genuine happiness and joy and well-being in the world. And if we go back to this guy, Joshua Green, the wunderkind atheist who is devoted to empirical research. So if he validates the teachings of Jesus, that's going to be all the more reason to take Jesus seriously. He says we really have 3 choices in life. And I love the way he develops this. He says, we can be homo selfishes. He's talking about species. We can be homo selfishes. These creatures don't care about each other at all. They do whatever they can to make themselves happy and care nothing about the happiness of others. The world of homo selfishness is a rather miserable world in which no one trusts anyone else and everyone is constantly fighting over resources. So the second possibility is we can be homo just like us. It says the members of this species, homo just like us, are rather selfish, but they also care deeply about a relatively small number of specific individuals, namely their families, and to a lesser extent, individuals who belong to certain groups, our tribes, if you will. This is a loving species, but their love is very limited. This is because members of homo just like us tend to amass as many resources as they can for themselves and their small group of close associates. This leaves many members of homo just like us without the resources they need. He says the final alternative is to be homo utilitas. But since I'm not a utilitarian myself, I changed that just a little bit. I changed it to homo virtuous. And so our last choice is to be homo virtuous. But I'll take his description because I think you'll see in his description of homo virtuous the very words of the Bible, the very teaching of Jesus himself. He says, the members of this species values the happiness of all members equally. Who's that sound like? That's Jesus. That's the golden rule. All right? This species is as happy as it could possibly be because its members care about one another as much as they care about themselves. Who's that sound like? That's Jesus. Love your neighbor like yourself. This species is infused with the spirit of universal love. Who's that sound like? And that is, the members of this species love one another with the same passionate intensity that the members of homo just like us love only their family members and close friends. Consequently, because homo virtuous cares about everybody equally, they are all a very happy lot. See, that's the choice. Who do you want to be? Who do I want to be? Homo selfishness? Homo just like us, which is where most people fall. Or homo virtuous, maybe even homo Christ-like us. And then he concludes all of his empirical research with a simple rule. And his simple rule is one word. And that one word is give. Give. And listen to what he says. He says, as individuals, we don't get to make the rules by which we live. We all know that. But each of us makes some important life and death decisions. And these are, for some people, life and death decisions. Literal life and death decisions. We in the affluent world have the power to dramatically improve the lives of others. We can delude ourselves about the facts, denying that our donations don't really help. Or, if we're more philosophically ambitious, we can rationalize our self-serving choices. But the honest response, the enlightened response, is to acknowledge the harsh reality of our habits and do our best to change them. To acknowledge the harsh reality of our habits and do our best to change them. My dear and beloved friends, that's what I hope your support of St. Matthew's is. An opportunity to do just that. Because this I know, and I know it as sure as I know anything, is that kind of giving will guard you against fear, will make you far happier than if you just spent that money on yourself or getting some new thing or whatever it might be. But even more importantly, is it won't just make you happier, but it'll promote the happiness and well-being of the people who need it the most. Amen? Amen.